The wind in the high Arizona desert did not just blow. It scoured. It scraped the foothills of the Chiricahua Mountains with a sound like a dull blade, seeking entry, promising a winter of iron and ice. Clara Monroe felt it in her bones, a deep, pervasive cold that the meager fire in her hearth could not touch. Her cabin, a small, run-down box of adobe and failing timber, stood alone on the edge of a fading frontier settlement. It was early winter, 1877, and the nights were already bitter. She had been alone for 2 years, ever since the fever had taken Elias, leaving nothing behind but his honorable discharge from the war, a stack of debts, and the heavy silence of this empty cabin. The silence was almost as cold as the wind. Clara was a pariah, though no one used the word, in the town, a mile down the dusty, frozen track. She was simply the widow Monroe, the one who was not right. The whispers followed her when she went for salt or flour, a quiet hiss from behind the mercantile curtains or from the women clustered near the church. She was not right because she had not gone back east to her family. She was not right because she had not crumpled into a state of helpless grief, waiting for the church to save her. Most damning of all, she had refused 2 offers of marriage, one from the town banker, a widower with damp hands and an appetite, and one from a rancher who saw her land as a convenient addition to his own. Her refusal was seen as unnatural, a defiance of the proper order of things. A woman alone was a problem, a target, or a temptation. Clara, with her steady hands and quiet, unblinking gaze, was simply an offense. So they avoided her. The preacher no longer made the ride out to check on her spiritual welfare. The sheriff's deputy, who used to stop for water, now rode by on the far side of the creek. Their isolation was a punishment, meant to break her, to force her back into the fold. But Clara would not break. Her life was pared down to the raw elements of survival. Each morning began with an axe, breaking the sheet of ice in the water barrel. She tended her 2 remaining chickens and a stubborn mule, their breath pluming in the sharp air. She mended her own clothes until they were more patch than fabric. She fetched her own water, hunted her own rabbits, and kept her rifle cleaned and loaded. The struggle was not just against the elements. It was against the men, not the marrying kind, but the others. The drifters who saw her chimney smoke as an invitation. The local hands from the big ranches who thought her property, and perhaps she herself, was up for grabs. Just last week, a man named Silas, foul-breathed and bold, had ridden into her yard, not even bothering to dismount. "That roof looks leaky. Mrs. Monroe," he'd called out, his eyes crawling over the cabin. "Hard winter coming. A woman can't manage a place like this alone." She had been chopping wood. She did not stop. She just hefted the axe. "I manage." His smile was slow and ugly. A shame for a woman to be so cold. A woman needs help. "A woman needs to be left alone," she'd said, her voice flat. He had laughed, spat a stream of tobacco juice near her woodpile, and ridden off. But the threat lingered, as sharp as the frost. They were watching, waiting. They saw her as prey. They hadn't learned yet that 2 years of solitude had made her a predator in her own right, defending the small, harsh territory of her life. She was mending a tear in her only thick blanket by the firelight when the sound came. It was not the wind. It was a heavy, wet thud against the porch, followed by a low groan. Clara froze. The needle pricked her finger, and a single drop of dark blood welled up. She stared at it, her heart slamming against her ribs. It was late, past 9 by the feel of the night. No one came here this late. No one came here at all. She set the blanket aside and reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. It was an old repeater, heavy, but she knew its mechanism as well as she knew her own hands. She moved to the single window, staying to the side, and peered through the warped, icy glass. A shape, a man, slumped against the porch post. He was large, a dark mass in the thin moonlight. "Who's there?" Her voice was hoarse. but it carried, "I've got a rifle. You best move on." The shape stirred. A hand came up, bracing against the post. The man tried to stand, then fell back against the wall of the cabin. "Please." The voice was deep and startlingly clear. It was laced with a pain so profound it cut through the wind. "I have nothing for you," Clara said, her knuckles white on the rifle stock. "If you're drunk, sleep it off in the wash. If you're a thief, you've picked a poor house." "Not a thief." The man pushed himself away from the wall, taking one staggering step toward the door. He was tall, taller than Elias and broad. He was an Indian. His long, dark hair was matted. He was holding his left shoulder. His hand, and the front of his worn shirt, was black with it. Blood. "Go away," she said, her fear sharpening into a command. "I'll shoot. I mean it." "They are coming." He leaned his head against the doorframe, his whole body shaking. "Bounty hunters. They shot me." Clara's blood ran cold. Bounty hunters. That meant the man on her porch was wanted, a killer, a fugitive. "That's not my concern. You bring trouble here." "Please." He didn't threaten. He didn't demand. He begged. The desperation in that one word was terrible. "Just for the night, shelter. They will not just kill me. They will torture me, hang me." She stared at the dark stain spreading on her porch. She could smell the metallic tang of his blood. "I can't. They'll kill me for helping you." "No." He coughed, a raw, wet sound. He was fighting to stay conscious. "There is a way, a ruse." He was speaking English, near fluent, better than many of the men in town. "If they find me, alone, I am just another Apache buck, worth a rope." He pushed his hair back, his face stark in the moonlight. It was a strong, hard face, now slick with sweat and grime. "But if I am a settled Indian, with a white wife." Clara's breath hitched. "What?" "They would not dare. Not on white land. Not interfering with a married man. It complicates the bounty. They might hesitate. They might leave." "That is the most insane thing I have ever heard," she whispered, horrified. "They'll look at me and look at you. They'll never believe it. They only need to doubt just until the storm hits, just for one night." He swallowed, a painful rasp. "Please, I am dying." As if to prove his point, his legs gave out. He slid down the doorframe, leaving a long, dark smear, and collapsed onto the porch boards. He did not move. Clara stood frozen for a full minute, the rifle heavy in her hands. The wind howled, lifting a few strands of his hair. He was a danger. He was death-walking. Helping him could mean her own end. They would burn her out. Or worse. Silas and his kind would call it justice. But he was bleeding to death on her doorstep. She looked at his hands. The one on his chest was clenched in his bloody shirt. The other was splayed on the wood, palm up, empty. She scanned his belt. No gun, no knife. He was unarmed. Or he had lost his weapons. It didn't matter. He was just a man, bleeding out. "Damn you," she breathed into the silence. "Damn you for this." She unbarred the door. The rush of frigid air was violent. It smelled of pine and distant snow. And now, of him. He was heavy, a dead weight. She couldn't lift him. She had to drag him, hooking her arms under his, her boots slipping on the bloody wood. She grunted with the effort, her muscles screaming. She hauled him over the threshold and kicked the door shut, fumbling for the bar. He lay on her packed earth floor, a massive, broken thing. The light from her single lamp was weak, but it was enough. He was Apache. She was sure of it. His features were high and stark, his skin a dark copper. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30, and he was soaked in blood. The wound was in his left shoulder, high up. It looked bad. "All right, Lord," she muttered. "If you're still in the business of miracles, I'll take one. If not, just stay out of my way." She did not have whiskey to spare for cleaning, but she had water boiling on the hearth for tea. She tore a strip from one of Elias's old shirts. She got her sewing basket, the one with the needles and strong gut thread, and the small, sharp knife she used for skinning rabbits. She set her jaw. She had done this before. She had dug a piece of shrapnel from Elias's thigh when he came back from the war, raving with infection. This was cleaner. She heated the knife tip in the flames until it glowed red. "This is going to hurt," she told the unconscious man. She cut the worn fabric of his shirt away. The skin beneath was smooth, pulled taut over thick muscle. The bullet hole was raw and dark. She pressed gently around it. The bullet was still in there, lodged against the bone. He moaned as she probed, a low, animal sound from deep in his chest. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice shaking only slightly. She worked quickly, her hands sure. Her stomach roiled at the smell of burnt flesh as she cauterized the small bleeders. But she focused on the task. She found the lead, a flattened, ugly piece of metal, and worked it free with the tip of the knife. It dropped into a tin bowl with a sickening clink. He was burning. The fever was already taking hold. She packed the wound with dried yarrow from her dwindling supply. It was good for stopping blood and cleansing a wound. Then she bound it tight with clean strips of flour sack, her hands brushing against the hot, smooth skin of his chest. She recoiled, as if burned. She sat back on her heels, exhausted, her hands covered in his blood. She had just saved the life of a wanted man, a man who had begged her to lie for him. She looked at his face, now slack in his fevered state. He was defenseless, and he was the most dangerous thing that had ever entered her home. She covered him with the patched blanket she'd been mending. Then she went back to her chair, laid the rifle across her lap, and waited for dawn. The sun came up thin and gray, filtered through a sky heavy with snow. Clara had not slept. Her eyes were gritty, her back stiff. The man on her floor, Kohana, he had called himself, was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. His skin was dry and hot to the touch. She was stoking the last embers of the fire when she heard it. Horses, more than one, coming fast. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" She looked at the door, then at the man. He was in no condition to lie about anything. He was barely alive. A hard, arrogant knock rattled the door. "Mrs. Monroe, open this door. We know you're in there." Clara stood. She smoothed her worn apron. A useless, automatic gesture. Her hands were trembling. She forced them still. She picked up the rifle, but this time, she held it loosely, pointed at the floor. She opened the door a crack. 3 men sat on horseback, their breath pluming. They were rough men, wrapped in buffalo coats, their faces hidden by grime and suspicion. The leader, a man with a graying beard and cold, blue eyes, dismounted. He had a shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. "Ma'am, name's Jebson." He did not tip his hat. "We're looking for a fugitive, an Apache buck, tall, goes by Kohana." I haven't seen anyone," Clara said. Her voice was too high, too thin. Jebson smiled, a humorless bearing of tobacco-stained teeth. "We tracked him this far, saw the blood on your porch." He peered past her into the cabin's gloom. "He's a killer, ma'am. Murdered 2 men near Tucson. We're authorized by the territory to bring him in, dead or alive. Now, you gonna step aside?" Clara's mind raced. The lie he had fed her, it was insane. It would never work. But what choice did she have? Tell the truth, and they would drag him out. They would see she had helped him, tended his wound. They would punish her, burn her. She took a deep breath, and the lie came, fully formed, as if it had been waiting. She opened the door wider, stepping back. "The blood is from my husband. He cut himself with the axe yesterday. He's..." He's in a bad way. The fever set in." Jepson's eyes narrowed. He had not expected this. He stepped onto the porch, his 2 men flanking him, their eyes cold and watchful. "Your husband, Clara?" The voice came from the floor. It was a deep, raw rasp, thick with pain. Kohana. He was awake. He had pushed himself up onto one elbow. The blanket pooled around his waist. He was shirtless. The firelight caught the coppery sheen of his skin, the hard lines of his chest and arms, and the stark white of the bandage on his shoulder. He looked magnificent and savage. He was looking directly at Jepson. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it would break from her chest. "Kohana, hush," she said, her voice shaking but hardening into a command. She rushed to his side, kneeling, putting a hand on his good shoulder. "You'll start the bleeding again. Lie down." She turned back to Jepson, who was staring, his mouth half open in disbelief. "We were married in late summer," Clara said, the lie finding its footing, growing stronger. "A traveling preacher. He helps me with the land." The silence in the cabin was total, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Kohana's labored breathing. One of Jepson's men spat onto her porch. "That's a damn lie. That's the one we've been tracking for 3 days. That's Kohana." "He is my husband," Clara repeated, standing now. She lifted her chin, meeting Jepson's stare. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with something new, a strange, reckless defiance. "And this is my land. You are trespassing." Jepson looked from her to the Indian on the floor. He saw the wound. He saw the defiance in her eyes. He was weighing his options. A lone Indian in a gully was simple. A white woman's husband, in her own home, was not. It was messy. It was complicated. "He's worth $500, Jepson said, testing her. "He is my husband," Clara said again, as if it were the only truth she knew. Jepson stared at her for a long, hard moment. The calculation in his eyes was ugly. "Finally," he snorted, a sound of pure disgust. "Have it your way, ma'am." He backed off the porch. "You're lying, and you're making a mistake that's going to get you killed." He mounted his horse, his eyes never leaving her. "He ain't going nowhere in this snow, and neither are you. You're caught in a trap of your own making." He turned to his men. "We'll check the perimeter, make camp down by the creek." He looked back at Clara, his face a mask of contempt. "You don't want to be caught lying for a redskin, Mrs. Monroe. It ends badly. For both of you. We'll check back." They wheeled their horses and rode off, their dark forms disappearing into the morning's thickening snow. Clara slammed the door, the wood vibrating from the force. She barred it, her hands shaking violently. She leaned her entire body against the rough planking, her legs finally giving way. She slid to the floor, the rifle clattering beside her. The lie, the terror, the sheer, brazen audacity of what she had just done, it all crashed down on her. She was empty, cold, and shaking. You spoke well," Kohana rasped from the floor. She looked at him. He was watching her, his dark eyes intense, fever bright. The emptiness in her stomach curdled, turning to a hot, sudden rage. "Get out," she whispered. "Clara." Get out!" She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the rifle again. This time, she pointed it at him. "They're gone, for now. You asked for one night. The night is over. The morning is here. Get out of my house." "I cannot," he said, his eyes on the gun. "You will." Her voice was ragged. "You heard him? They're camping by the creek. They'll be back. They'll kill me. They'll burn this place to the ground. You have to go." Kohana stared at her, at the rifle shaking in her hands. He saw the terror in her eyes, the panic that was making her cruel. He nodded, a slow, grim acceptance. "I will go." He braced his good hand on the floor. With an effort that made sweat pop on his brow, he pushed himself to his knees. He used the wall to haul himself up, swaying. His hand clutched to his wounded shoulder. A fresh stain of red was seeping through the bandage. He stood there for a moment, a towering, broken man. He took one step toward the door, then another. His eyes rolled back in his head. His knees buckled, and he pitched forward, collapsing onto the packed earth with a heavy, final sound. He did not move. Clara cried out, a short, sharp sound of denial. She dropped the rifle and rushed to him, rolling him onto his back. His skin was on fire. The effort had been too much. The fever had taken him completely. He was unconscious. He was helpless, and he was still in her cabin. She looked at the barred door, where the bounty hunters had stood. She looked at the massive, fevered man at her feet. "Damn it!" she swore, the word a sob of pure, unadulterated frustration. She couldn't throw him out. Not like this. Not into the snow. It would be murder. With all her strength, she grabbed the blanket and dragged him back to the fire, closer to the warmth. She got a cloth and dipped it in the cold water bucket, bathing his face. "One more night," she whispered to the still, unconscious man. "Just one more night, then you have to be gone." But as she looked at the snow falling thick and fast outside her window, and felt the chilling presence of the men camped by the creek, a terrifying certainty settled in her heart. One night was just the beginning. The snow fell for 3 straight days. It was a thick, blinding curtain of white that erased the world, burying the creek, the tracks, and the very memory of the men camped there. The wind howled, a high, lonely moan that found every crack in Clara's cabin, driving fine powder through the door frame and the window sash. It was a brutal, cleansing storm, and it was the only reason they were still alive. Kohana did not wake for 2 of those days. He lay on the pallet of furs she had made for him near the hearth, lost in the inferno of his fever. He was a mountain of a man, and he was brought low, reduced to a rasping breath and a tremor in his limbs. Clara's life narrowed to the rhythm of his survival, which had become inexplicably tangled with her own. She could not throw him out. To open the door was to invite the blizzard itself into her home, and to cast him into it would be a sin worse than any her preacher father had ever condemned. It was not mercy that moved her. It was a cold, practical horror. She would not be a murderer. So she worked. She melted snow for water. She steeped the last of her yarrow for a bitter tea, forcing it past his cracked lips. She unbarred the door only long enough to stumble to the woodshed for more fuel, the wind tearing at her skirts, and she returned each time caked in ice, her lungs burning. She kept the fire blazing, a hungry beast that consumed her precious wood. On the second night, his wound began to fester. She saw the dark red creeping up his neck when she changed the bandage. The smell was sour, the flesh hot and swollen. The fever was winning. She did what she had seen her mother do once for a farmhand gored by a bull. She boiled her skinning knife again. She muttered no prayer, just a grim, "Hold on, damn you," and lanced the wound. He roared. It was not a human sound. It was a bellow of pure agony that shook the cabin. He thrashed, a single violent motion that sent her sprawling backward. But the poison was free, a dark, awful flood. He fell back, unconscious, his body slick with a new sweat. Clara, her heart pounding, simply got up, wiped her bloody hands on a rag, and went back to work. She cleaned the wound again, packed it with salt, a cruel but necessary fire, and bound it tight. For the rest of the night, she sat with her rifle, watching him. The storm had broken, inside and out. The wind quieted, and as the first gray light of the 4th morning crept into the room, Kohana opened his eyes. He did not speak. He just watched her, his gaze clear and sharp. The fever gone. His eyes were dark, almost black, and held a stillness that unnerved her. She met his gaze, her own hard. "You're on my floor." His voice was a dry croak. "I see that." "The hunters are still out there," she said, her voice flat. "The snow will have them pinned, but it won't hold them forever." "How long?" "3 days." She ladled broth from a pot, thin rabbit broth, more water than meat. "You've been near dead." She brought the bowl to him. He tried to sit up, and the simple motion cost him. He gritted his teeth, his face pale beneath his copper skin. She watched him, unmoving. He managed to prop himself on one elbow. His hand was unsteady as he reached for the bowl. She held it fast. "If you spill it, there isn't any more." Their hands touched, his fingers brushing her knuckles. His skin was rough, calloused, but the touch was not threatening. It was just warm. She pulled her hand away as if she'd been burned. He drank the broth slowly, his eyes closed, savoring every drop. When it was gone, he let his head fall back against the wall, exhausted. "You saved me," he said, his voice stronger now. "I stopped you from dying on my floor," she corrected. "There's a difference." "There is," he agreed, his eyes opening. He studied her, his gaze so direct it felt like a physical touch. "Why?" "The storm. I couldn't throw you out." "Before the storm, you lied for me. You called me your husband." Clara flinched, turning away from him to poke the fire. The flames leaped. "It was what you asked, a ruse. It was stupid, and it won't work again." It worked for a moment. He shifted, the furs rustling. "Your voice, it did not shake." She turned on him, her fear suddenly returning as sharp-edged anger. "What do you want from me? Thanks? I've lied to men who will burn my home. I've harbored a fugitive. I've likely signed my own death warrant. All for a man who won't tell me why he's being hunted." She expected him to be angry. She expected him to be silent, but he only looked at the fire, his expression unreadable. "I am hunted," he said quietly, "because I am a ghost, and ghosts are inconvenient." "That's not an answer," she snapped. "It is the truest one." He looked back at her. "My name is Kohana. It means swift hand in the tongue of my people, the Chiricahua Apache. But I speak English because a white man in a black coat taught me I can read the white man's words. I lived at the reservation at San Carlos. I learned to be a good, settled Indian." He paused, a bitter smile twisting his mouth. "It did not suit me." "So you ran?" "I left. I knew the land, the white soldiers, the cavalry. They knew I knew it. They hired me. A scout." Clara stared. An Apache scout for the U.S. cavalry. It was not unheard of, but it was a dangerous, bloody trade. "I was good," he said, his voice flat, stripped of all pride. "I tracked my own. I led them to the hidden places. I did this for 2 years. I believed the lies they told, that there could be peace, that we could share the land if we just followed the rules." He looked down at his own hands, clenching the good one into a fist. "Then they sent us after a small band. Old men, women, children. They had left the reservation to hunt. They were starving. The captain, a man I had shared tobacco with, he gave the order." He stopped. The silence in the cabin stretched, heavy and cold. "They killed them all," he whispered. "The women, the babies. They paid me a bounty for my part, $10. And when I tried to stop him, when I put my hand on his gun, he called me a traitor. He said I was just like the rest of them." Kohana looked up, and his eyes were black hollows of a pain she could barely comprehend. "They put a price on my head, for insurrection and betrayal of his post. My own people, those who are left, they see me as a ghost, a man who hunted his kin for silver. The white men see me as a savage who turned on his masters. I belong nowhere. So they hunt me." He lay back, his story told, and the confession seemed to drain the last of his strength. Clara said nothing. She sat down on her small stool, the rifle in her lap, and stared at the man who was two things at once, a killer and a victim. She understood his isolation. In a way she could not have predicted. She understood it. He slept. She watched. The next day, she spoke. He was sitting up, his back against the wall, mending his own shirt with the needle and thread she had left for him. His stitches were small and precise, as fine as her own. "I was born in Pennsylvania," she said, her voice sounding strange in the quiet. He stopped sewing and looked at her. "My father was a preacher, a man of God. He quoted scripture while he corrected me." She touched a faint scar on her hairline, hidden by her parting. He believed a woman's will was a sin, and that it was his duty to break it. "My mother, she just grew quiet. And then she died. I knew he would choose a new wife, and I would be a servant. Or he would marry me off to one of his pious, brutal friends." She looked at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. "Elias Monroe was a soldier. Passing through, he asked for my hand. He was quiet. He didn't look at me with hunger. He just looked tired. I married him in 2 days. I married him to escape. I did not know him." "He was your husband," Kohana said, his voice soft. "He was a stranger, and the war had broken him in places I couldn't see." She got up and began to knead a small lump of dough for bread. The rhythmic, violent motion was a comfort. "He came out here for the dry air," he said, "but he brought his nightmares with him. He would wake up screaming, smelling the smoke, the blood. He hit me twice, but he was not like my father. He wept afterward. He begged me to forgive him." She slammed the dough onto the floured board. He could not forgive himself, so he drank. He drank until the nightmares stopped. He drank until his liver gave out. He drank himself to death in that bed, and I was relieved. She stopped, horrified at her own words. She had never spoken this truth aloud. "He died 2 years ago, and I am still a prisoner," she whispered. "I was my father's prisoner, then my husband's. Now I'm a prisoner of this town, of my reputation, of their whispers. A woman alone, a thing to be fixed or used or pitied." She looked at Kohana. "So you see, we are both ghosts." An uneasy truce settled. The snow began to melt, but the cold held. They were confined, and the cabin became their world. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. She cooked. He mended. He taught her how to set a snare, and she caught a rabbit. She taught him how to make her bread, and he had a lighter touch with the dough than she did. The silence between them changed. It was no longer an absence of words, but a presence, a quiet companionship. They would sit for an hour by the fire, he carving a piece of wood with a small knife, she mending a stocking, and no words were needed. On the 6th day, the wound was healing clean, but his body was weak from stillness. He needed to move, and she was almost out of firewood. "I can do it," he said, his voice firm. "You'll open the wound. If I do not, we will freeze." He stood, and this time he was steady. He put on his mended shirt. It was cold, but he did not take her husband's coat. He took the axe, which he tested in his good hand, and went outside. Clara watched him from the window, her hands twisting in her apron. The world was white and sharp, the sun a pale disk in the sky. He moved to the woodpile, the snow crunching under his moccasins. He shed his shirt. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He did not seem to feel the cold. The winter sun struck his back, highlighting the smooth, copper skin, the hard ridges of muscle, the stark white of the bandage on his shoulder. He was built like the mountains, all hard lines and effortless strength. He hefted the axe, and the motion was fluid, economical. The blade bit into a log of dry pine with a sharp thwack. He worked for nearly an hour, steam rising from his skin in the frigid air. Clara did not move from the window. She watched the play of muscle in his back, the way he moved with a grace that was almost animal. She had lived a life starved of beauty, and this man, This man was beautiful, a fierce, forbidden beauty. A deep, unfamiliar heat pooled in her belly. It was a hunger so profound, so sudden, that it terrified her. It was not just for his body. It was for the life in him, the raw, untamed strength that had refused to die. Shame followed, swift and cold. She was a widow, a God-fearing woman, or she was supposed to be. He was an Indian, a fugitive. The world saw him as less than a man, and she was looking at him with a craving that felt like a mortal sin. She turned from the window, her face burning, and scrubbed the wooden table with a fury that was aimed only at herself. That night, the tension in the cabin was different. It was no longer just the tension of shared danger. It was something else, something sharp and brittle. He slept by the fire, as he always did. Clara lay in her own bed, a curtain separating them, but she was awake. She listened to his breathing, the soft, even rhythm of it. Then it changed. He moaned, a low sound of distress. He shifted. He began to speak. Not in English. The words were guttural, urgent, spoken in his own tongue. She did not understand them, but she understood the terror. It was the sound of a nightmare, the same sound she had heard from Elias for years. She held her breath, praying he would grow quiet, but it got worse. He was pleading, then growling. No, no, he muttered in English, his voice thick with sleep and fear. She couldn't bear it. Her instinct, honed by years of living with a broken man, was to soothe, to wake him, to bring him back from the dark. She slipped from her bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She crept around the curtain. In the dim glow of the embers, his face was a mask of agony. His hands were clenched. "Kohana," she whispered. "Kohana, wake up. You're dreaming." She reached out, her hand hovering, and then she touched his good shoulder. He moved faster than she could have believed possible. He erupted from the furs, not as Kohana, but as a cornered animal. A low snarl ripped from his throat. His hand came up, hard and fast, aimed for her throat. She screamed, stumbling back, her hands flying up to protect herself. His hand stopped, an inch from her face. His fingers were splayed, his arm rigid, trembling with the force of the blow he had arrested. He was awake. His eyes were wide, black with horror, staring not at her, but at what he had almost done. The dream was gone, replaced by a stark, awful reality. He had almost struck her. He recoiled, pulling his hand back as if she had been the one made of fire. He scrambled away from her, his back hitting the stone of the hearth. He gasped. "I did not—" And then he broke. The strength that had chopped wood, that had survived a bullet and a fever. It just dissolved. He dropped his head into his hands, and his shoulders began to shake. He did not make a sound at first, just a deep, shuddering tremor. Then a single, dry sob was torn from his chest. He turned his face away from her, toward the stones, as if to hide, but the grief was too big. He wept, not with the loud, angry tears of Elias, but with a silent, profound sorrow that seemed to drain the very life from him. Clara stood frozen, her own fear evaporating, replaced by a terrible, aching empathy. This was his true wound. The bullet in his shoulder was nothing. This was the wound of the man caught between two worlds, the man who had lost everything, the man who woke up fighting for his life. She did not think, she moved. She knelt beside him on the cold floor. She did not speak. What was there to say? Instead, she slowly, gently, reached out her hand. She did not touch his shoulder or his back. She touched his face. Her fingers, calloused from work, brushed the damp hair from his temple. Her thumb rested on the sharp line of his cheekbone. His skin was hot, wet with tears. He flinched at her touch, a small, involuntary motion. But he did not pull away. He leaned into her hand, just slightly, a desperate, unconscious seeking of comfort. She just held him, her hand gentle on his face, until the terrible shaking subsided. He lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face vulnerable, stripped bare of all his defenses. He looked at her, and the shame in his gaze was replaced by something else, a raw wonder. His voice was a broken whisper. "I didn't want to live," he said, his breath catching. "Before I came here, before your door, I was running to die, but you fought for me. You lied for me." He paused, and his eyes searched hers in the dim light. "I didn't want to live before I met you." The words hung in the air, more intimate than any touch. They were a confession, a burden, and a gift. Clara's heart ached. She saw him. Not the savage, not the fugitive, not the ghost, just Kohana. The space between them was no longer cold. It was electric. Her hand was still on his face. His hand came up, the good one, and covered hers, holding it there. He was looking at her mouth. She was looking at his. He leaned in. She felt his breath, warm and tasting of smoke and sorrow. She leaned in, her eyes fluttering closed. It was inevitable. It was right. Then, the fear. It crashed into her. The faces of the bounty hunters, the whispers of the town, the body of Elias, the voice of her father, the sheer, impossible, damning sin of it. She pulled back. She ripped her hand from his, scrambling to her feet. I can't. She fled, stumbling back behind the curtain, her heart hammering a frantic, guilty rhythm against her ribs. From the other side, she heard him move, a soft sigh, the sound of the furs as he settled. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low and formal, the distance back between them. "I forgot myself." Clara lay in her bed, her body trembling, her eyes wide open in the dark. She was afraid, but it was no longer the bounty hunters she feared most. It was the man on the other side of the thin cloth curtain, and the traitoress, answering hunger in her own blood. The tension in the small, dark cabin had a new name, and it was one neither of them dared to speak. The thaw came with a sudden, wet violence, as if the sky had ripped open. The 3 days of snow were followed by 2 of a warm, Chinook-style wind that turned the world to mud and slush. The creek rose, a brown, churning torrent. The bounty hunters, Jebsen and his men, were gone. Their campsite by the creek was just a sodden, frozen mess of tracks and refuse. Clara felt a sliver of hope, thin and sharp as an icicle. Perhaps the storm had driven them off for good. Perhaps they had given up, decided the hunt was not worth the misery. Kohana knew better. He stood at her small window, his body now taut with a coiled, restless energy. His wound was healing, the skin puckering into a long, dark scar. He had regained his strength, and with it, his silence. But it was a different silence now, a shared one, heavy with the things they had said and the one thing they had almost done. "They are in town," he said, his voice low. He was watching the track that led to the settlement, now a river of mud. "You don't know that," Clara replied, her hands kneading dough she did not feel. "A white man's frustration turns to whiskey," he said, "and whiskey turns to talk. They are in the saloon. They are telling their story." His words chilled her more than the damp air. He was right. The isolation that had protected her was about to become her prison. The lie she had told, the impossible, desperate claim of husband, would be picked apart by drunken men and spat back at her. The knock came 2 days later. It was not the arrogant slam of the bounty hunters. It was an official, heavy rap. Kohana did not even look at her. He simply moved, a shadow melting into the darkest corner of the cabin, behind the curtain that shielded her bed. He pulled the thick fur with him, and was gone. Clara wiped her floured hands on her apron, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She opened the door. Sheriff Brody stood on her porch. He was a tall, stooped man, his face worn into a map of worries. He held his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect that almost made her weep. "Ma'am," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. He looked at her muddy yard, at the dripping roof of her lean-to. "Can I come in for a moment? It's a bit of official business." "Sheriff," she stepped back, holding the door. He entered, bringing the smell of wet wool and stale tobacco. His eyes did a slow, practiced sweep of the small room. He saw the single chair, the small table, the hearth. He saw the pallet of furs by the fire, the one Kohana had just left. It was still warm. Clara's breath caught. "Ma'am, I'm in a difficult position here," he began, turning his hat over and over in his hands. "There's talk. You know how this town is." Clara said nothing. She stood by the table, her hands clenched. 3 men, bounty hunters, name of Jebsen, were in town. They were loud. They were saying they tracked a fugitive, an Apache named Kohana, to your door. They said—" He finally looked at her, his gaze filled with a weary pity. "They said you claimed him as your husband." He cut himself," Clara whispered, the lie tasting like ash. "The fever." "Clara," he said, and her given name was a small shock. "Please, don't make this harder. Jebsen says the man was shot. He says you lied to an officer of the territory, which he claims to be. He's filed a complaint, not just about the fugitive, but about you." He cleared his throat, a deep, uncomfortable sound. "The town council is in an uproar. The preacher is talking about corruption, about the law. Ma'am, the law in this territory is very clear. It is illegal for a white woman and an Indian man to cohabitate, to marry." "He is not here," she said, her voice hard and brittle. "He left 2 days ago. He was hurt. I patched him up. He left." Sheriff Brody looked at her, and she knew he didn't believe her. He saw the desperation in her eyes. He saw the second bowl on the table, the one she hadn't washed. His gaze flickered to the bed curtain, and, for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would look. He was a decent man, caught in an indecent world. "All right, ma'am," he sighed, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll tell them what you said. I'll tell them I came out here, and I saw no one. That you are a widow, alone, and grieving." He walked to the door, then paused. "But you need to listen to me. Jebsen and his men, they're not like me. They're not bound by a badge. They're bound by money, and by hate. They feel you made fools of them. They're telling everyone in the saloon that you're an Indian lover, that you've shamed this town. They're drunk, and they're angry." He looked her straight in the eye. "If this man, this Kohana, is here, you get him out. If he's not, you bar your door and you pray. These are not good men. Clara, and I'm only one man, with a lot of miles to cover. I can't protect you from talk, and I'm not sure I can protect you from what comes after." He left. The mud sucked at his boots as he walked away. Clara shut the door and sagged against it, her body trembling. Kohana emerged from the shadow, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were fire. "He is a weak man," Kohana said. "He is a good man," Clara defended, her voice shaking. He warned me." "He warned you, but he left you," Kohana stated. "He left you to the wolves." "What are we going to do?" she whispered, the reality of her situation crashing in. "They'll come back. Jebsen." "I will go," Kohana said, his voice final. He began to move, gathering his few things. The knife she had used to cut him, the mended shirt. "They hunt me. They will not harm you if I am gone. The town will forget." "Forget?" she cried, a harsh, hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "They will never forget. They will call me a whore, a liar, a traitor to my race. Do you think Jebsen will just leave me be? After I lied to him? After I chose you." He stopped, his back to her. "It is my fight. I brought this to your door." "And I let you in," she shouted, moving to stand between him and the door. "I lied. I saved you, and you think you can just walk out into that mud and they'll just kill you, and I'll be safe?" She grabbed the front of his shirt, her fists bunching the rough fabric. "No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to die for me and leave me alone to face them. They'll kill you before you get to the creek. And then they'll come for me. They'll kill me, too, or worse. They'll drag me back to town as a trophy. The whore who hit an Indian." He looked down at her, his face softening with a pain that mirrored her own. "Clara, what choice is there? Stay, and we both die here. Go, and I die, but you might live." "No," she said, her voice dropping to a desperate, cunning whisper. "You said you know the mountains. You said you know the hidden places, the places the cavalry can't find." He stared at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. You cannot. It is winter. The passes are. It is a hard life, a life for no one." "It is a life," she said, her grip tightening. This is a death sentence. I will not wait here to be burned. I am not my mother. I will not. Just grow quiet and die." She looked up at him, her choice made, a terrible, freeing choice. "You're leaving? Good. I am coming with you." The rest of the day was a blur of frantic, silent preparation. They were fugitives now, both of them. The dying sun cast a sickly yellow light across the floor. They had to be gone before full dark. Clara moved with a grim purpose. She packed what she could: a sack of flour, salt, the last of the dried beans, Elias's heavy wool coat, which she had never worn, all her ammunition, her skinning knife, and the small, smooth stone her mother had given her, which she slipped into her pocket. Kohana was all business. He was testing his body, stretching, his movements economical. He sharpened her axe until the edge gleamed. He took the rope from the mule's shed. He filled 2 water skins. He was a warrior preparing for a long march. He looked at her, his eyes assessing. "Your boots?" She looked down. They were worn, the leather cracked. He shook his head. He cut strips from the last fur pelt and, with quick, sure movements, bound them around her boots, packing them with dried grass for warmth. "It will not be enough," he said, "but it will help." Just as the sun touched the mountains, a new sound came, a frantic, skittering run. Someone was pounding on the door, not with a fist, but with small, panicked hands. "Mrs. Monroe! Mrs. Monroe! Open up!" Clara looked at Kohana, her eyes wide with terror. He already had his knife in his hand. She opened the door. It was Timothy, a young boy from town, no more than 10, his face pale and tear-streaked, his chest heaving. He was the son of the washerwoman, a boy she had once given a whole apple pie to, after finding him shivering in the alley behind the mercantile. "Timmy, what is it? You must go home." I ran," he gasped, clutching a stitch in his side. "I heard them. In the saloon, my PA, he's in there, Jebsen, that gray-bearded man, he bought a round. He said, they're coming, after dark." The boy was crying now, his small body shaking. "He said, they're gonna burn the Injun lover's nest. They got oil from the lamps. They're coming to burn you out. Mrs. Monroe, they're coming now." Clara grabbed the boy, her heart seizing. "Timmy, you are a good, brave boy. Now listen, you run home. You go in the back door. You get in your bed. You pretend you were never here. Do you understand? You saw nothing. You heard nothing. But, ma'am..." "Go! Run! And God keep you, child!" He fled, a small, terrified ghost disappearing into the twilight. The time was gone. Now, Kohana said. His voice was cold iron. He grabbed the 2 sacks. He handed Clara her rifle. He kicked open the door. The air was frigid, the sky a deep, starless purple. The world was poised, holding its breath. "The trail starts in the wash," he said. "It is hidden. We must be in the rocks before they see the smoke." "They'll see our tracks," she said, her voice trembling. "The creek," he said. "We walk in the water. It is cold, but it will hide the tracks. Come." He did not take her hand. He simply went, and she followed. They plunged into the icy water of the creek, the same creek where the hunters had camped. The cold was a physical blow, a pain so sharp it stole her breath. It surged past her knees, soaking her skirts, weighing her down. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Kohana moved ahead, a dark shape against the dark water, his feet sure on the slick rocks. She stumbled, her rifle heavy, her bag pulling at her shoulder. She kept going. After what felt like an hour, her legs numb and shaking, he stopped. He was at the bank, pulling himself up under a thick overhang of rock and roots. It was an animal trail, barely visible, leading straight up the canyon wall. "Here," he whispered. He grabbed her arm, his grip like a steel trap, and hauled her from the water. They were in the pass. The wind was a living thing here, a high, keening scream that tore at her wet clothes, turning them to ice. The ground was no longer mud. It was frozen scree. And then, as they climbed, it was snow. Deep, powdery snow that had not melted, drifts that came to her waist. This was his world. He moved through it with a slow, grinding patience. He was saving his strength. Clara had no strength to save. She was running on pure, terrified will. She fell, her foot, numb and stupid, slipped on an icy rock, and she went down hard, her knee striking the stone. She cried out, a small, sharp sound that the wind swallowed. "Clara!" He was beside her instantly. I'm fine," she gasped, trying to get up. But her legs were shaking too hard. The wet wool of her skirts was frozen solid. She was encased in ice. "I can't, my legs, they won't move." "Yes, they will," he said. It was not a question. He unslung his own pack, retied it with hers. He shrugged the double weight onto his good shoulder, grunting as the strap bit into his wound. "Get up," he commanded. She used the rifle as a crutch and stood, her body a single, vibrating ache of cold. They walked for another hour, 2. The world was a nightmare of white snow and black rock, lit only by a sliver of moon. Clara's vision was tunneling. She was moving, but she was no longer thinking. Just 1 foot, then the next. She fell again, this time into a deep drift. The snow was soft, like a bed. It was warm. She could just rest for a minute. "No," his voice came from far away. He was there, hauling her up by the front of her coat, her head lolled. "I can't," she mumbled, her words thick. "Leave me. I'm too slow." "I am not leaving you," he snarled, his voice fierce. He was angry. The anger seemed to warm her. "We are almost there." He let her go, and she crumpled. He had lied. They were not almost there. She saw him through a blur. He stood over her, his chest heaving, his breath pluming. He said something in his own language, a curse aimed at the gods, at the snow, at her. Then he crouched. He turned his back to her. "Now." "What?" "On my back. Your legs are done. My back is not. Now, Clara." She stared at his back. It was so broad, so strong, with a final, desperate surge of energy. She crawled from the snowdrift and looped her arms around his neck, pressing her body against his. He grabbed her legs, hooking them around his waist, and stood. He stood, bearing her weight, and his own, and the weight of their supplies, and he began to walk. He did not stumble. His steps were slow, methodical, sinking deep into the snow. But they never faltered. Clara buried her face against his neck. He was warm. His skin smelled of pine and smoke and him. She was exhausted, terrified, and frozen. But she was no longer alone. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of his walking, the solid, powerful strength of him, carry her. He stopped. She opened her eyes. They were in a cave. It was not a cave, so much as a deep cleft in the rock face, a hollowed-out den sheltered by a massive, wind-blasted pine. It was barely big enough for two, but it was out of the wind. He let her slide down. Her legs buckled, and she sat hard on the rocky floor. He was breathing heavily, but he did not rest. He immediately began to work, gathering dry tinder from the back of the cave, shaving slivers from a dry branch with his knife. He used his flint and steel, and a small, precious spark bloomed. He built a tiny fire, almost smokeless, its flames hidden by the rocks. A small, weak warmth began to fill the space. And with the warmth came the pain. The feeling returned to Clara's feet and hands, a screaming, agonizing prickle of fire. She huddled, rocking back and forth, tears freezing on her cheeks. Kohana watched her, his face grim in the firelight. He took the driest of the furs and came to her. "The danger is past," he said, his voice soft. "For this night." The danger was past, but the reality of what she had done, what she had lost, crashed down on her. She looked at her hands, raw and red. She looked at her frozen, muddy skirts. She had lost her home, her land, the last vestiges of her name. She had run from a town that hated her, with a man who was hunted, to die in the snow. A sob broke from her, a dry, ragged sound. And then another, the dam of her restraint, the wall she had built around her heart for years. It did not just crack, it shattered. She gasped. "I'm so afraid." She wept, not with the quiet, dignified tears of a widow, but with the ugly, desperate sobs of a terrified child. "I'm always alone," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "My father, he looked at me like I was a sin. Elias, he just wanted a nursemaid for his nightmares. He never touched me, not like a wife. He just used me to hold his hand while he died. And the town, they look at me like I'm something to be broken." She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and grime, her eyes pleading for an answer he could not possibly have. I am so tired of being used. I am so tired of being unloved. I am so alone." Kohana did not speak. He did not offer her weak comforts or false promises. He simply knelt before her. He took the fur blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, his large, rough hands tucking it in, his knuckles brushing her cold neck. He sat back on his heels, his dark eyes holding hers in the flickering firelight. He saw her. He saw the brokenness, the fear, the raw, aching need. He did not flinch from it. He reached out, not to her body, but to her face. His thumb, calloused and hard, brushed a tear from her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected, it stole her breath. He leaned in. The world shrank to the small, fire-lit space. There was no snow, no hunters, no past. There was only his face, his eyes, and the heat coming from his body. He paused, an inch from her, giving her time to pull away, to be afraid. She did not pull away. She surged forward, her hand coming up to fist in his shirt, and met his mouth with hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and aching and full of all the words they could not say. It was a hunger for life, a defiance of death. It tasted of salt and smoke and the cold, clean air of the mountains. It was a raw, aching demand to be seen, to be held, to be wanted. He answered her, his mouth as desperate as hers. His hand moved from her face, sliding into her wet, tangled hair, holding her head as he deepened the kiss. He was not gentle. He was sure. He was a man taking what was freely, desperately offered. When they finally broke for air, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. "Clara," he whispered, his voice a low vibration against her lips. A new storm was building outside, the wind rising to a howl, throwing pellets of ice against the rock. He laid her back on the furs, his body a warm, heavy weight covering hers. He unlacing her frozen boots, his hands chafing her numb feet, bringing them back to painful life. He unbuttoned Elias's heavy coat, pushing it away. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a need that matched her own. This was not the hurried, shameful fumbling of her past. This was slow. This was deliberate. This was an aching need that had been building since the first night. They moved against each other, slow and sure, a silent language of touch and surrender. He was discovering her, and she was discovering him. The hard, scarred landscape of his body, the heat of his skin. It was a kind of worship. In the flickering light of the fire, while the world raged outside, it was a healing. It was a promise. Later, curled against his side, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her as if he would never let go. She listened to the storm. She was warm for the first time in years. A deep, pervasive warmth that started in her belly and spread to her fingertips. She was a fugitive. She was homeless. She was, by every law of God and man, a fallen woman. But she was not alone. She tilted her head, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart under her ear. "Don't leave me," she whispered into his skin. "Kohana, don't ever leave me." He did not answer with words. He simply pulled her closer, his hold tightening, as if he could shield her from the entire world, and hold her there, safe, until the end of time. The morning broke cold and sharp, the sun a weak, watery light against the high rocks. Waking up in the cave was a disorienting, slow return. Clara was aware, first, of the warmth. It was Kohana, his body a solid, living furnace against her back, his arm heavy and possessive around her waist, their legs tangled in the furs. The storm outside had died to a breathless, ringing silence. She did not move. She lay there, listening to the steady, quiet rhythm of his breathing. The night before had not been a dream. It had been the most real thing that had ever happened to her. She felt a tremor of fear, not of him, but of the world, of the sin she had so desperately embraced. But the fear was thin. Beneath it was a profound, aching tenderness, and a sense of having finally, after a lifetime of walking, arrived somewhere. She felt him wake. His breathing changed, deepened, his hand, resting on her stomach, tensed. He did not move, as if he, too, were assessing the new, fragile shape of the world. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble against her hair. It was not a question. It was a statement. She turned in his arms to face him. In the gray light, his face was stark, his eyes dark and searching. He was looking at her for regret, for the shame he had been taught white women carried. She offered him none. She simply looked back, her gaze as steady as his. She was a different woman than the one who had knelt, weeping, hours before. She reached up and touched the scar on his shoulder, the one she had made, the one she had tended. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. His eyes softened. "No." He said nothing more. He did not speak of the night. He did not offer promises or pretty words. He was a man of the earth, and his actions were his language. He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of morning and wood smoke. It was a kiss of knowing, a kiss that sealed the bargain they had made in the dark. Then he pulled away. The tenderness was gone, replaced by the warrior. "We must go before the sun is high. We cannot go back." "I am not going back," she said. The journey was harder than the flight. The panic of the previous night had been a strange, sharp fuel. Now, there was only the cold, the deep snow, and the ache in her muscles. But she was not the same. She did not stumble as much. When she did not wait for him to haul her up. She used her rifle as a brace and pushed herself to her feet, her jaw set. Kohana led them deeper, higher, into the jagged spine of the mountains. He moved with an innate knowledge of the land, avoiding the ridges where they would be seen, staying in the deep shadows of the canyons. He taught her as they walked. "Here," he said, stopping, pointing to a set of faint depressions in the snow. "Coyote. He is hunting. We walk where he walks. He knows the safe path." He showed her how to walk on the rocks to leave less sign, how to read the wind. She listened, her mind sharp, absorbing every detail. This was not just a lesson. It was a catechism of survival. After 2 hours, just as she felt the familiar, cold seep of exhaustion in her thighs, he stopped. They were on a high ledge, looking down into a small, sheltered bowl, a dimple in the vast, rocky face of the mountain. "There," he said. She saw nothing but snow and pine. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw it, a low, dark shape, half buried in a drift against a sheer wall of granite. It was a cabin, though it was barely that. It was a trapper's hut, long abandoned, its roof caved in on one side, its chimney a pile of loose stone. "It is not much," he said. "It is shelter," she replied. They made their way down. The hut was small. One room, the door long since torn from its leather hinges. Inside, it smelled of pack rat and dry rot, but the walls were thick stone, and the one side that was caved in was the leeward side. The main roof, made of thick, rough-hewn timbers, was still intact. It was a fortress against the wind. "We can stay," Kohana said, his eyes already scanning the surrounding terrain. "It is high. We can see who comes. There is water, a spring, under the ice, a half-mile down, and there are rabbits." They settled. The word felt strange, for such a raw and broken place. But it was the truest thing. They made a home. The first days were about work. Kohana, with his axe and knife, was a force of nature. He cleared the fallen roof, using the sound timbers to patch the hole. He rebuilt the chimney, his large hands fitting the stones together with a patient, perfect geometry. Clara, following his lead, gathered the dry, dead branches from under the pines, stuffing them into the gaps in the stone, chinking the walls against the wind. She swept the floor of rat droppings and old leaves with a branch of pine, the sharp, clean scent overpowering the rot. They worked from sunup to sundown, side by side, in a silence that was companionable, not cold. They were two parts of a single machine, driven by the need to live. In the evening, they would eat. Their life was pared down to its essentials. Kohana would go out in the gray twilight and return, silent as a shadow, with 2 rabbits or a grouse. He never came back empty-handed. He did not just provide for her. He taught her. This, she realized, was the greatest change. Elias, in his good moments, had treated her as a fragile thing, to be protected from the harshness of his world. Her father had treated her as a vessel, to be emptied of will. Kohana treated her as an equal. "You will learn," he said. On the 3rd day, he was setting a line of snares in a rabbit run. "I cannot always be here. You must know how to feed yourself." He handed her a length of thin, strong cord. "No, not like that. You are thinking like a woman. You must think like the rabbit. He is fast. He is afraid. He runs this path every day, because his father ran it. He does not look up. He looks for the shadow of the hawk." He showed her how to tie the slip knot, how to find the trigger stick, how to place the loop at the exact height of a rabbit's head. His hands, large and scarred, were deft, his movements precise. She tried. Her fingers were numb, clumsy in the cold. The knot was wrong. "Again," he said, not with impatience, but with a quiet authority. She tried again. This time, the loop held. "Good," he said, and that one word from him felt like a benediction. She learned to skin the rabbits, the way he showed her. A single, quick cut and a sharp pull. She learned to use the knife without wasting the meat. She had stitched her husband's clothes and her own seams. Now she stitched a tear in her leather boot with an awl he made from a sharpened bone and sinew from the rabbit. Her hands grew rougher, the calluses thicker, but they felt, for the first time, like her own. One afternoon, she went to check the snares alone. He had gone to hunt, looking for the deer he had been tracking. She walked the line, her feet sure on the path he had shown her. She came to the third snare, and it was gone. Her heart leaped. She followed the drag marks in the snow, and there, tangled in a bush, was a large white hare, kicking weakly. She did not hesitate. She did not feel squeamish. She felt capable. She took her skinning knife, the one he had sharpened for her, and did what was necessary. A quick, clean end. She walked back to the hut, the rabbit heavy in her hand, a fierce, quiet pride warming her from the inside out. She was not weak. She was not broken. She was a survivor. She looked at her hands, smeared with blood and dirt, and she thought of the widow Monroe, the pale, frightened ghost who the town pitied and despised. That woman was gone. She had burned away in the cabin, frozen in the snow, and been reborn in these mountains. She was by the fire, stewing the rabbit with some wild roots Kohana had dug. When he returned, he was empty-handed, his face grim. "The deer has moved on," he said, the frustration clear in his voice. She just nodded and held up the rabbit she had caught. "Then it is a good thing I am here. We will eat tonight." He looked at the rabbit, and then at her. He saw the blood under her fingernails, the smudge of soot on her cheek, the quiet confidence in her eyes. A slow, rare smile touched the corners of his mouth, transforming his face, making him, for a second, look like a young man. "Yes," he said, his voice soft. "It is a good thing you are here." That night, the rhythm of their new life found its groove. They were no longer two strangers clinging to each other for warmth. They were partners. They ate in silence. The hot, thin stew, the most delicious meal she had ever tasted. They sat by the fire, the wind howling outside, a sound of defeat, because it could not touch them. They whispered. The darkness and the small, shared space invited a new kind of intimacy. He told her stories of his people, of the Gan, the mountain spirits who he believed watched over this very place. He told her of his childhood, before San Carlos, of a life so free she could barely imagine it. She, in turn, told him of the East, of the ocean she had seen once as a girl, a body of water so vast it looked like the sky had fallen. I used to sing," she confessed one night, her voice low, almost inaudible. "Sing," he commanded, his voice gentle. I cannot, not in years." "Sing." She took a shaky breath, and a thin, reedy sound came out. It was a hymn, one her mother used to sing. Her voice cracked, thick with disuse and old sorrow. She stopped, embarrassed. He did not laugh. He simply reached out in the dark and took her hand. He held it, his thumb rubbing slow circles on her palm, until she fell asleep. Their bodies found a rhythm, too. Their love-making was no longer the desperate, frantic coupling of the cave. It was as natural as their shared work, as quiet as their whispered conversations. It was a slow, deep knowing, a language spoken in the dark. It was the comfort of his weight, the scrape of his day-old beard on her neck, the way his hands, which could kill, were so impossibly gentle. They moved together, intertwining as naturally as the roots of the ancient pines outside, their trust growing deeper with every touch, every shared night. One afternoon, more than 2 weeks after their arrival, Clara returned from the spring, her water skins full. The air was warmer, a false spring, and the snow was melting, the ground soft. She found Kohana sitting outside the hut, in the pale sunlight, carving. He had a piece of dry pine, and he was working it with his small, sharp knife. His shoulders were relaxed, his face absorbed. He was not the hunted warrior. He was just a man, at peace. She watched him, her heart swelling with a feeling so powerful it almost frightened her. It was not just need or gratitude. It was love, a deep, quiet, terrifying love. He looked up, as if sensing her, and smiled. "What is it?" she asked, setting the water down and coming to sit beside him. He turned the piece of wood over in his hands. It was a small, graceful figure of a hawk, its wings half spread, its head turned as if listening to the wind. The detail was so fine she could see the feathers. "It is Itzachu," he said, "the hawk. He sees far. He watches. He is a protector." He held it out to her. It was warm from his hands. "For my mother," he said, his voice quiet. "I carved a fawn. For you, a hawk. You are not a fawn, Clara Monroe. You have talons." She took it from him, the wood smooth against her palm. This was not a trinket. It was not a gift from a suitor. It was a piece of his soul. It was an Apache symbol, a gift of DI, of spirit, given to her. He was giving her his protection, his heritage, the deepest part of himself. She was overcome. Kohana," she whispered, her voice thick. I have nothing to give you." "You are here," he said, as if it were the simplest, most profound truth in the world. She leaned in, and her kiss was not one of need or desperation. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated love, a giving of her own soul. She poured everything she was into it, the gratitude, the respect, the fire he had uncovered in her. He responded, his arms coming around her, pulling her close, his mouth answering her love with a fierce, deep passion. They were no longer white and Indian, fugitive and widow. They were just a man and a woman, on a mountain, alive. The peace was so perfect, it could not last. It shattered 3 days later. Kohana had been restless. The warming weather, the melting snow. It made him pace. It meant the trails were opening. It meant men could travel. He had gone out, a wide scouting circle, to check the lower passes. Clara was inside, mending his shirt, the one she had cut from his body weeks ago when he returned. She knew, before he even spoke, that it was over. The man who entered the hut was not her partner. It was the hunted ghost. His face was a mask of cold stone, his eyes black and hard. "What is it?" she asked, her hand freezing, the needle poised. "Pack," he said, his voice flat. He was already strapping his bedroll. "Kohana, what did you see?" "Boot prints." The words were like chips of ice. "A mile south, on the ridge, where the snow has melted." Clara's blood turned to water. "Jepson?" "A white man's boot, worn heel, heavy, one man." He slung the rifle over his shoulder. "But he is a tracker. He was not a lost miner. He was moving slow. He was reading the ground. He was looking—" "Did he see you?" "No, I was above him. But he found the trail from the creek. He is not a fool. He will find this place by tomorrow." The hut, their small, safe world, suddenly felt like a box, a trap. The peace they had built, the intimacy, the fragile, beautiful life. It was an illusion. The real world, the world of hate and bounty and blood, had found them. Kohana was already by the door, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, his body coiled. He was a warrior. Clara stood up. The fear was there, a cold sickness in her belly. But the weeping, terrified woman from the cave was gone. She put down the mending. She looked at her hands. She thought of the rabbit. She thought of the hawk in her pocket. She walked to the hearth and picked up the whetstone. She took her skinning knife, the one he had given her. She sat, her back straight, and began to sharpen the blade. The sound filled the hut, rhythmic, steady, and sharp. Shing, shing, shing. Kohana looked at her. He saw her calm. He saw the grim set of her jaw. She was not panicking. She was not weeping. She was preparing. They were no longer just surviving. They were defending something sacred. Their home, their life, each other. The sun began to dip, painting the snow outside in shades of blood and lavender. The hut grew dark. They worked in silence. He was setting traps near the doorway. A deadfall from a heavy log, a tripwire of sinew. She was sharpening a long, sharp point on a broken piece of timber, a spear. She stopped, the knife in her hand as sharp as a razor. She looked at him. He was checking the load in her rifle, his face illuminated by the last, dying light. He was beautiful, and he was deadly, and he was hers. She walked to him, put her hand on his arm. He stopped, his muscles tense under her touch. "If we die," she said, her voice quiet, steady, a simple statement of fact. "If they come, and we do not, leave this place, I want you to know." He turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "I would rather it be with you," she said, "than live alone without you. I would rather die here as your woman than live 100 years as the widow they wanted me to be." He stared at her, the hard lines of his face softening in the twilight. He saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the hawk. He saw the talons. He dropped the rifle and pulled her to him, his mouth crashing down on hers. It was not a kiss of love or of tenderness. It was a kiss of fire and iron and death. It was the kiss of two warriors on the eve of battle, swearing an oath with their bodies. He pulled back, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath hot on her face. "We will not die tonight," he whispered, his voice a low, vicious growl. "They will." They did not sleep. They sat in the dark, the fire reduced to a pile of red, watchful eyes. Every snap of a frozen branch, every gust of wind that moaned in the rebuilt chimney, was a prelude to the attack. Kohana was by the door, his knife in his hand, his body a coiled spring. Clara was at the small window, her rifle loaded, her own skinning knife tucked into the belt of her trousers. The trapper's hut, once a sanctuary, was now a tomb, a box waiting to be broken. The dawn came not as a light, but as a lessening of the dark. The world turned a flat, cold gray, the color of ash and old bone, and with the gray came the sound. A single, sharp whistle, like a hawk. It was answered by another, from the rocks above. Kohana looked at Clara. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. He did not need to speak. They were here. "Stay away from the window," he whispered. A voice, thick with malice and morning cold, cut through the silence. It was Jebsen. We know you're in there. You filth! We saw the smoke, saw your tracks. You've got nowhere to run. Kohana, send the white whore out. We might let her live, but your scalp is worth $500. Kohana's hand tightened on his knife. He said nothing. "Have it your way," Jebsen roared. "Burn 'em out." A thud struck the roof, and then the smell, kerosene. A second thud, and the acrid smell was stronger. "The roof!" Clara gasped, her eyes wide. "They're on the rocks above." "It is a trick," Kohana said, his voice low. "He wants us to run out, into his gun." A third man, one Clara had not seen before, scrambled down the rock face, landing near the front of the hut. He was carrying a torch. "Now, hail!" Jebsen shouted from his unseen perch. The man, Hale, rushed the door. He was not trying to open it. He was trying to set it ablaze. But Kohana had prepared. The deadfall log he had balanced above the door, triggered by a rope inside, was his only defense. Kohana pulled the rope. The log, heavy and water-soaked, crashed down. Hale had not expected it. He looked up, his eyes wide with stupid surprise. Just as the timber struck him, it did not kill him, but it broke him. He fell, his leg bent at a sick angle, the torch sputtering in the snow. The hut door burst open. It was not Hale. It was the other man, Marcus, the one Clara had stabbed. His face was a mask of rage, his side wrapped in a bloody bandage. He had come for revenge. He charged into the dark hut, a long knife in his hand. Kohana met him. It was not a fight. It was a butchering. Two large, desperate men in a space no bigger than a grave. Clara screamed as they crashed against the wall. Kohana's knife against Marcus's. It was all grunts, and the sound of tearing cloth, and the thud of fists on flesh. Kohana was stronger, faster, but Marcus was fighting with the desperate, empty rage of a dying man. "Jebsen! Shoot him!" Marcus shrieked as Kohana's larger body forced him back. From the rocks, a rifle shot exploded. The bullet tore through the open doorway, ricocheted off the stone chimney, and buried itself in the wall. In that second of distraction, Marcus drove his knife into Kohana's side. Kohana roared, a sound of pure animal pain, but he did not falter. His own knife, the one Clara knew so well, swept up and across, opening Marcus's throat. The man gurgled, his eyes wide, and slumped to the floor, dead. Clara had no time to be sick. She saw Kohana stagger, his hand clamped to his side, blood welling between his fingers. He was wounded. Again. "Kohana!" He ignored her. He looked past the body of Marcus, his eyes fixed on the man outside, the one who had tried to get up. Hale. Jebsen fired again, the shot chewing the wood of the doorframe. "Clara, the rifle!" Kohana gasped. "Keep him on the rock." She ran to the window, her hands shaking, and lifted the heavy gun. She fired at the puff of smoke from the rocks. She did not know if she hit him, but the shooting stopped. Kohana burst from the hut, ignoring his wound. He moved with a terrifying speed. He leaped over the groaning body of Hale, his knife in hand. Hale, his leg broken, tried to drag himself away, his face a mask of terror. "No, please, I just wanted the money." Kohana's face was dark. He was not a man, he was an executioner. He raised his knife. "No!" Clara screamed from the doorway. Kohana froze. He looked at the whimpering, broken man at his feet. He looked at Clara. The bloodlust faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality. Jebsen fired again. The bullet kicked up snow at Kohana's feet. "He is running!" Clara yelled. Jebsen, seeing his two men dead or dying, had finally panicked. He was scrambling from the rocks, heading for his horse, a dark shape moving fast. Kohana threw his knife. It was a desperate, long throw. The blade spun, end over end, and struck Jebsen in the back, embedding itself in his thick buffalo coat. It was not enough. The coat was too thick. Jebsen cried out, more in surprise than pain, and ripped the knife free, turning to fire one last time. Kohana was already moving, but his wound had stiffened. He was too slow. Clara, still holding the rifle, fired. The shot was true. It struck Jebsen in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, rolled, and got to his feet, his arm hanging limp. He looked at them, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "This ain't over," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You hear me? You'll never be free. I'll bring the cavalry. I'll bring the whole damn territory down on you. You're dead. You're both dead." He stumbled to his horse, hauled himself into the saddle with his good arm, and galloped away. A broken, fleeing shape against the morning snow. Silence. The world was suddenly, terribly quiet. There was only the sound of the wind, and the low, agonizing moans of Hale, the man with the broken leg. Clara walked out of the hut, the rifle heavy in her hands. She looked at Hale. She looked at Marcus, dead on her floor. She felt nothing, just cold. Kohana walked to her. He was swaying. His hand was still pressed to his side, and the front of his shirt was soaked in a fresh, bright red. You are hit," she whispered. It is bad," he admitted, his voice tight. He looked at Hale. The man was weeping now, a pathetic, blubbering sound. Kohana looked at Clara. His duty was clear. He could not leave a witness. He could not leave a man to die slowly. Clara saw the look. She shook her head. "No more, please, no more killing." Kohana stared at her, then nodded, a grim, slow motion. He walked to Hale, who flinched, shielding his face. Kohana did not kill him. He used his good arm and the last of his strength to haul the man up, slinging him over his own shoulder. He carried him to the man's own horse, tied near Jebsen's, and threw him over the saddle. "Go," Kohana growled, smacking the horse on the rump. "Go and tell no one, or I will find you, and I will not be merciful." The horse, panicked, bolted, carrying the screaming man away. Now they were truly alone. Kohana turned to her, and the strength that had held him up, the adrenaline of the fight, it all left him at once. He staggered and fell to his knees in the snow. "Kohana!" She was at his side in an instant, dropping the rifle. She tore his shirt open. The knife wound was deep, just above his hip, a ragged, ugly gash that was bleeding far too much. "Inside," she commanded. "Now, we have to stop this." She got him to his feet, her shoulder under his good arm, and half dragged him back into the hut, stepping over the cooling body of Marcus. She laid him on the furs, her hands already flying, grabbing the last of her clean bandages, the yarrow, the needle. She worked, her hands no longer shaking. She packed the wound, pulled the edges together, and stitched it, just as he had taught her to stitch the hides. Her stitches were small and tight and angry. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, her hands covered in his blood. He was pale, his skin clammy, but his eyes were clear. He looked at her. "You must go," he whispered, his voice ragged. Clara froze. "What?" Jebsen. He was not lying. "He will bring men, many men, soldiers." He reached out, his hand grasping her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "You must go, south, to Mexico, alone." She stared at him, disbelief turning to a cold, hard anger. "They will not look for a lone woman," he gasped, fighting for breath. "You can find a town. You can be safe. You will be Clara Monroe again, a widow. They will leave you be." She looked at him, at this man she had bled for and killed for, this man who, after all this, still saw her as something to be protected, to be sent away. She ripped her wrist from his grasp. "No," she said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with a sudden, brilliant rage. "Clara, you must—" "No!" She stood up, looming over him. "I am not the widow Monroe. That woman is dead. She died in a cabin they were going to burn. I am not weak. I am not something you can discard to keep me safe. I am not leaving you." "They will kill you," he whispered, his eyes pleading. "Then they will kill me," she said, her voice flat. "But I will not run. Not from them, and not from you." She knelt again, her face close to his, her eyes burning into his. "I am not your wife just for one night. Kohana, I am yours in the fight, too. I am yours in the blood and in the snow, and I will be yours when they come. We leave, together. Or we die, here, together. He stared at her, the fight in his own eyes dying. He saw her. He saw the hawk. He saw the woman who had fired a rifle and stabbed a man and now stood, covered in blood, refusing to break. A slow smile, painful and full of awe, touched his mouth. He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her cheek, his thumb smearing the blood on her skin. "My hawk," he whispered. "My Clara." He nodded. A single, sharp motion. Together. The decision was made. They did not have time. They had to leave before Jepson returned. Clara packed what little they had left, the last of the food, the water skins, her rifle, and every bullet. She helped Kohana to his feet, hissing in pain as his wound pulled. "I can walk," he gritted out, though she was taking most of his weight. "Then walk," she said. They left the hut and the two dead men to the mountains. They began the long, slow trek south, toward the Mexican border. Kohana knew a place. He said, a hidden valley in the canyons, where the U.S. law did not reach, a place where Apache and Mexican and even outcast white men lived, a place where they could be free. It was a terrible journey. Kohana, weak from blood loss, could only move for an hour at a time. Clara, her own adrenaline gone, felt the exhaustion in her bones. But she did not complain. She scouted ahead. She helped him over the rocks. She became his eyes and his strength. For 2 days, they pushed south into the barren, waterless high country, following a trail only Kohana could see. On the 3rd morning, Kohana was better. His wound was closing, his strength returning. It was Clara who faltered. She stumbled, her hand going to her side. "Clara?" He stopped, turning to her. I am fine," she said, her voice thin. "Just tired. I need a moment." She sat down, hard, on a flat rock. She looked pale, her skin a waxy gray color Clara had not seen before. "You are not fine," Kohana said. He came to her, his eyes narrowed, scanning her. He saw it before she did. A dark, spreading stain on the side of her wool trousers, just above her hip. "You are hit," he whispered, his voice hollow with a new, sudden terror. "What?" She looked down. "No, I fell. It's... Oh." In the chaos of the fight, she had not felt it. When Marcus had grabbed her, his knife, or perhaps his, had found her. It was not a deep wound, but it was a jagged, dirty one. In the cold, and in her fear, she had not bled much. Now, with the walking, with the warmth. "When?" Kohana demanded, his hands gentle as he pulled the fabric away. "Marcus," she whispered, her head spinning. When he grabbed me, I didn't even know." Kohana looked at the wound, and his blood ran cold. It was not the wound itself. It was the redness, the swelling, the heat coming from it. It was infected. "Clara," he said her name, and all the strength, all the warrior's calm, was gone. His voice was just terrified. She looked at him, her eyes wide. It hurts, Kohana. It really hurts." She swayed, and he caught her as she collapsed. Kohana carries her, terrified. He did not know how long he ran. He lifted her, his own wound screaming in protest. But he did not feel it. He just moved. He ran through the canyons, her light, frail body in his arms, his heart pounding a frantic, terrible rhythm. She was dying. He had saved her from men, only to have her stolen by a scratch. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He ran toward the only place he knew. It was not a mission. Not really. It was a ruin, a collapsed adobe church from the time of the Spanish. 200 years gone. But it was not empty. In the shadow of the broken bell tower, a small cluster of jackals, of huts, were built. hidden from the world. He stumbled into the small, dusty plaza, his legs finally buckling. "Ayuda!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Please help!" An old woman emerged from the darkest hut. She was tiny, her face a brown, wrinkled map of 100 years, her hair a long, white braid. She looked at the giant, bleeding Apache warrior and the pale, dying white woman in his arms. She did not look surprised. She just nodded, as if she had been expecting them. "Adentro," she said, her voice dry as a corn husk. "Inside! Quickly, hijo! The sun is hot!" He carried Clara into the cool, dark hut, which smelled of dust and dried herbs and a deep, ancient peace. He laid her on a low cot, a pallet of soft, worn blankets. The old woman, a healer, a curandera, shooed him away. "Out! You bleed on my floor." "I will not leave her," he growled. The old woman looked at him, her black eyes snapping. "You will, or I will let her die. I need herbs. I need water. You are useless. Go, sit." He had faced bounty hunters, and cavalry, and death. But this tiny, old woman terrified him. He stumbled out and collapsed against the wall in the shade. He waited. An hour. 2. The sun moved across the sky. He heard Clara cry out. Once, a short, sharp sound. He started to his feet, but the old woman's face appeared in the doorway. "Siéntate, sit." He sat. Finally, as the sun was touching the mountains, the healer emerged. She was wiping her hands on her apron. "She will live," she said simply. Kohana's legs gave out, and he slid to the ground, his head bowed, a dry, racking sob shaking his body. The old woman watched him, her expression softening. She came to him and touched his head. "Now, hijo, it is your turn. You are a fool to walk so far with such a wound. Men, estúpido." She tended him. She cleaned his wound, her hands surprisingly strong, her touch firm. She clucked over his stitches. A child's work. Terrible. Who did this? "She did," Kohana whispered. The healer stopped. She looked at the hut where Clara lay. She looked at the giant man. She nodded. "Ah, bueno." For 3 days, Clara drifted in a fever. Kohana never left the doorway. He sat, cross-legged, his knife in his hand, watching her. The healer, whose name was Esperanza, brought them food, thin broth, corn cakes. She watched them, the way he would not eat until she had fed Clara, the way Clara, even in her fever, would relax when she heard his voice. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Clara woke, her eyes clear, her body weak, but her own. Kohana was at her side in an instant, a cup of water in his hand. Esperanza came in, nodding in approval as Clara drank. "He is a good man," the healer said, her voice matter-of-fact. She was changing the bandage on Clara's side. He worries. A good husband." Clara flushed, her eyes darting to Kohana. We are not married, Señora." Esperanza laughed, a dry, rustling sound. She looked at Kohana, who was staring at Clara, his heart in his eyes. She looked at Clara, who was looking at him with the same raw devotion. "No?" the old woman smiled, her wrinkled face full of a deep, old wisdom. She pointed a long, brown finger at them. "You two are already married," she said, her voice firm, as if delivering a verdict. "The earth sees it, the spirits see it." She tapped Clara's bandaged side. "You have bled for him." She tapped Kohana's. "He has bled for you. You have fought together. You have run together." Her eyes twinkled. "The church, the paper, that is for white men who forget their promises. That is for men who need a law to be good. Your promise, it is in here." She pointed to Kohana's heart. "And here," she pointed to Clara's. "You are bound, more than any paper. The spirits ask for no more. She left them, a bowl of warm water on the floor, and shut the door, leaving them in the cool, quiet dark. Clara looked at Kohana. His eyes were dark and full of a love so profound it made her ache. He had no ring. He had no farm, no name, no money. He had nothing. He was a fugitive, a ghost. He took her hand. His was rough, scarred, and warm. Hers was small and pale, and fit perfectly inside it. He did not say, "I love you." He did not say, "Will you be my wife?" He just looked at her, and his eyes said everything. He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, wooden hawk. He pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers around it. A promise. She took his hand, the one that had fought for her, and brought it to her lips, kissing the scarred knuckles. A vow. In the eyes of the law, they were nothing. In the eyes of the world, they were a sin. But in this small, dark adobe room, with the smell of herbs and the weight of their survival, they were, finally and completely, married. The seasons turned, and the high, sharp peaks of the Chiricahua Mountains gave way to the rolling, sun-baked canyons of the borderlands. The place Kohana knew was not a town, not a settlement, but a scar on the land that the world had forgotten, and in doing so, had made it safe. It was a hidden valley, a deep fold in the earth carved by a forgotten river, accessible only by a single, treacherous goat path that Kohana had found in his youth. Months passed. Spring bled into a long, hot summer. Clara's old life, the one in the dusty town, seemed 1,000 years gone. It was a story she had once read about a different woman, a pale, frightened ghost. The valley was called, by the few who lived there, El Nido, the nest. It was a community of ghosts, a jumble of people who had, for one reason or another, fallen off the map of the United States. There were a half-dozen Apache families, those who had refused the reservations, who lived in quiet, wickie-up shelters. There were Mexican families who had fled the political turmoil in their own country, their brightly painted adobe huts built into the canyon walls. There was a former soldier, a Negro man named Elias, who had deserted after the war, living in a small, neat cabin with his wife, a freedwoman named Sarah. There was even a one-eyed gambler who had cheated the wrong man in Tucson and now grew the best corn in the valley. There were no laws, save one. You did not speak of the life you had left. You did not ask another man his name or his crime. You were accepted, on the day you arrived, as the person you chose to be. It was a society built on the shared understanding of what it meant to be hunted. In this place, Clara and Kohana were not a scandal. They were not even a curiosity. They were simply Clara and Kohana, a single entity. They built their own home, a small, sturdy jackal of stone and river mud, tucked into a bend of the small creek that fed the valley. Kohana, the warrior, became Kohana, the builder. He was a man of the earth. He hunted, yes, but he hunted for the valley. He brought deer to Sarah and Elias. He helped the Mexican men build a new roof. He taught the Apache boys how to read the tracks. The rage in him, the coiled spring of violence she had first seen, had unwound. He was still quiet, still possessed of that deep mountain stillness. But the anger was gone. He had laid his pain down. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man. Clara, the widow, became Clara, the healer. She found her place among the women. Her hands, which she had once thought only good for mending and cleaning, became instruments of life. She had a calm esperanza. The old curandera from the missionary outpost had taught her the herbs before they left, giving her a bag of dried roots and leaves as a parting gift. "The mountain gives you everything you need," she had said. "You just have to listen." Clara learned to listen. She learned which root brought down a fever, which leaf, chewed to a paste, sealed a wound, She learned from the Apache women how to find the sweet, starchy yucca root and how to cook rabbit with wild sage until it melted. One night, a young Mexican woman named Rosa went into labor. It was her first, and it was a bad one. The baby was turned. The valley's midwife, an old Apache woman, had shaken her head. It was a death sentence. Clara, hearing the screams, had walked into the hut. She had seen this once. As a girl, a calf turned wrong. She had washed her hands, and with a quiet authority that surprised even herself, she had taken over. She had worked for hours, her arm deep inside the suffering woman, her voice a low, steady murmur. She had not prayed to her father's God. She had simply worked. She had turned the child, a boy, small but screaming. After that, she was no longer just Kohana's wife. She was Clara, the one with the good hands. She delivered 3 more babies that summer. She sat with Sarah when Elias was struck by a rattlesnake, brewing the golondrilla tea that Esperanza had taught her. Until the fever broke, she found a purpose, not in God or in a husband, but in the soil, in the community, in her own capable hands. She was, for the first time in her life, completely and truly free. Their life together was quiet. It was made of small, shared moments. The way he would rise before dawn, his body a warm, dark shape in the hut, to check the perimeter, a habit he would never lose. He would return with 2 cups of water, one for her. They would sit on their small porch, watching the canyon walls turn from purple to red, and not a word was needed. She learned the language of his body. A tensing of his jaw meant he had seen a hawk and was thinking. A softening of his eyes meant he was at peace. He, in turn, learned hers. He knew by the set of her shoulders when she was tired. He knew by the way she hummed that her herbs had taken root or that a patient was better. They were a universe of 2 in a valley of outcasts. One evening, in the late fall, when the air was turning crisp, Kohana was late. He had gone to hunt, to stock their larder for the winter. Clara, her hands stained with berry juice, was grinding corn. She felt the old, familiar prickle of fear. The world outside the valley was still full of Jebsons. But she pushed it down. This was their home. He was safe. He returned just as the moon was rising, a bright, cold disk. He was not carrying a deer. He was carrying nothing but his rifle and his knife. Clara came out of the hut, her heart suddenly tight. "Kohana!" He said nothing. He walked to her, his face unreadable in the moonlight. He stopped in front of her. I was worried," she whispered. "I was busy," he said, his voice a low rumble. He reached into the pouch at his belt. He pulled out his hand. It was closed in a fist. He opened it. Resting on his broad, scarred palm was the hawk. It was the same small, wooden figure he had carved for her in the trapper's hut, the one she had lost in the fight, in the flight. She had mourned its loss, the loss of his first gift, his first promise. But it was not the same. He had found it. He had kept it. He had worked on it. It was no longer just raw pine. He had polished it with fat and stone until it shone like dark glass. He had painted it with small, precise lines of ochre and charcoal, defining the wings, giving the eyes a fierce, bright life. And around the hawk's neck, a small, thin cord was tied. And on that cord, woven with sinew, was a single, long strand of her own hair, brown and light, shining against the dark wood. It is a wedding gift," he said, his voice rough. "It is the Apache way, the first gift, made right, made permanent." She stared at it, her throat closing. The small, wooden hawk, her hair, his work, their survival, all bound together. It was more real, more precious than any ring of cold, dead gold. She could not speak. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched it. Then she looked up, into his eyes. She put her arms around his neck and pulled him down to her. That night, they made love. The fire crackled, a small, bright flame in their hearth. Outside, the first storm of winter was rolling in, the wind howling high on the canyon walls. A distant, angry roar, but it could not touch them. It was not the desperate, frantic coupling of the cave. It was not the fierce, defiant passion of the hut. It was slow. It was raw. It was a kind of worship. His hands, which had carved the hawk, were slow, reverent, learning her body anew. Her body, which had brought life into the world, was open and strong and sure. It was a slow, deep healing. It was the union of two souls who had been broken and had found a way to make themselves whole. Together, their bodies spoke of everything they had survived and everything they were building. In the towns, far away, in the world of preachers and sheriffs, the name Clara Monroe was forgotten. It was just another name, on a deed for a piece of land that had been auctioned off. Her cabin burned to the ground by, as the official report said, an accidental fire. The name Kohana was never spoken. He was just another dead Indian, his bounty unclaimed, his ghost haunting the mountains. But in the high hills, in the hidden places, a legend was told. The curanderas told it. The old soldiers, drinking by their fires, told it. The Apache grandmothers told it to the children. It was the story of a widow who had been cast out, a woman with the quiet hands of a healer and the heart of a hawk. And it was the story of a great Apache warrior, a ghost who was hunted by all, who had laid down his rage, his knife, and his pain in the arms of a white woman, a woman who had dared to love him, and who had, in doing so, given him back his life. The next spring, the world was green. The creek was high and fast, and the small peach trees the Mexicans had planted were in bloom. From the doorway of her hut, Clara watched. She was not the thin, harried woman who had arrived here. Her body was fuller, softer. Her face, which had been pale and drawn, was now browned by the sun, her hair thick and long, her eyes clear and calm. In the small, dusty patch of ground that served as the valley's center, Kohana was standing. He was not a warrior. He was a teacher. He was holding a small, 4-year-old boy, Elias and Sarah's son, young Abe. Kohana had the boy balanced on the back of his own quiet mare. "No, hijo," Kohana said, his voice a low, patient rumble. He was showing the boy how to hold the reins, not with force, but with feel. "You do not pull. You ask. You feel her heart. She is like the water. You are the rock. You guide." The boy, his small, dark face serious, nodded, his hands gentle on the leather. Kohana smiled, a full, open smile that still made Clara's heart ache, and he walked the horse, step by slow step. Clara smiled, a slow, deep, peaceful smile. She looked at the man she loved, a man who was building a new world. She looked at the valley, her home. She put her hand on her own belly. It was full and round, and she could feel the faint, quick flutter of the new life inside, their child. Her smile did not waver. Life here was not easy. It was hard. It was a life of rock and wind and hunger, but it was real. She thought of her father's cold house and her husband's cold bed and the town that had tried to bury her. Love had not found her in a church. It had not found her in a parlor. It had found her on a bloody porch, in the cold, in the dark, where no one else had ever dared to look, and she would never, ever be alone again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope it brought you a piece of the Old West. We would love to know where in the world you're listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you never miss a new tale. And finally, please share your thoughts on Clara and Kohana's story in English in the comments below. We read every single one.